Well, hey everybody, welcome to week 4, the final week of our year-end devotional series. My name is Zollo. I'm one of the online pastors here, and man, I love this season so much. I hope that you've been getting a lot out of these devotionals. If you've missed any of the prior weeks, this is week 4. 3 weeks before this, they're all available on Elevation Plus, available for you. So if you've missed any, go back and watch them. They've been so good. And today we get to wrap up before we head into the year-end offering this weekend. And we are talking about how when we're generous, we honor God. That's the 4th promise. And the previous couple weeks here, we're going to do just a little recap, okay, to just kind of refresh our memory before we get into that 4th promise. So week 1, when we're generous, we shift our focus. It's not about me. It's not about me when I get to be generous. I love that. Week 2, when we're generous, we experience God's provision. What I love so much about that is a lot of times when we think provision, we think, oh, if I'm generous, then I get money back. And it's not about money. It could be you get that back, but it's about provision from God in so many areas of your life. I love that. Week 3, last week, when we're generous, we build our faith. What I love about this is so much in this season in our lives, there's so much trust put in markets and government and everything like that. And that's not really faith building. But when we give and we get to trust in God and that builds our faith, we know that when we invest in what it is that God says is important, that the returns are always up and to the right. Right? We don't have to worry about that. And I love that. So today, I really feel like the 3 of those build to where we are today, because I feel like if you do all of them, you're honoring God. So much of that just ties into one another. Any one of those things that we just said would say, hey, doing that is certainly honoring to God. And so today, as we start out the 4th promise of generosity, we're talking about when we're generous, we honor God. Okay, so 2 Corinthians, we were in this a couple weeks ago as well, 2 Corinthians 9. So we're going back to 2 Corinthians 9, and we're going to hit verses 11 through 12. But before that, here's what you got to know. 2 Corinthians 9 is all about Paul talking to these Corinthians about how they're supposed to be generous. And not just how they're supposed to be generous. What's really cool about this, if you read the whole chapter, which I would encourage you to do, don't just take our word for it, go back and read it yourself. But chapter 9 is all about Paul sharing with Corinthians about how they're about to be generous toward the Macedonians. And here's what's cool about that. Sometimes we think, hey, we do this year-end offering every year here at Elevation Church. Like, where did this start? How did we even get this idea? Well, this is one of the places that type of thing started. These guys were taking an offering to make sure that other people were taken care of. They were taking an offering to say, you know what? It's not about me. We're going to take what it is that God has given us and help people who are in need. And when we do that, it honors God. So 2 Corinthians 9, 11 through 12, this is what it says. You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. We could stop there and just talk about that for a little while, but I'll keep going. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. That's just the first, but I got to read it again because it's really good. You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. It's like all the time. And through us, through these people, through the Corinthians, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. This service that you perform is not only supplying the needs of the Lord's people, but is also overflowing in many expressions of thanks to God. It's just an overflowing expression of thanks when people get to be generous. And it's both and, right? It's when you're generous, you can be so thankful for what it is that God has given you, but you also know that when you're generous, the people that you're giving to are going to be so thankful in so many different areas. And again, I hope that you're tying this in as I'm talking and as you've probably heard these past couple weeks. I hope you're thinking just even about what God is speaking to you in this season. This isn't just like a today thing. I hope you've been asking God, what are you encouraging me to do as I hear these words? We talk about this a lot each week, that what you hear is only as good as how you apply it, right? And so how are you thinking about applying this in your life? And what I love it is that, again, I said this earlier, but it's all building on itself to this point of understanding that everything we do with generosity, if it's directed in the right way, is honoring and pleasing to God. When you give, it's doing so much more than taking what God has entrusted you and bringing it back to him. That is first and foremost. You got to understand, if you haven't gotten it to this point, what you have is not yours. God is entrusting you with what it is that he's given to you. And now our responsibility is, how do I take what it is that I have and honor God with it in every area? We're talking about finances right now in year end because we're about to come together and take an offering, but this flows over into every area of your life. What am I entrusted with that now I'm being required to honor God with it? What does that look like in my life? And what I love, though, is when I think, how can I honor God? It's, well, I'm trying to be like him and what he's created me to be. I'm trying to get to the point where he looks at who I am and says, yes, like that's closer to who I want you to be than you are now. And where does my example come from that? Well, first and foremost, my example of what it looks like to honor God is to try to do what it is that God did for us, right? I mean, it's simple, but John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave. He started out by saying, you know what? I love you so much that I'm going to give something that's so important to me, to you, to help you. And ultimately knowing, going back to that verse in 2 Corinthians, ultimately knowing that this is really going to give thanks back to me, right? It's like, I'm doing this for you, and ultimately it's going to result in people understanding who I am, or I'm going to give my son. And so we're never more like God than when we give. It's not just a money thing, though. Take that thought out of your mind. Every time I say give, it's not just money. We're never more like God than when we give. And when we give and when we're generous, we're honoring who God is. We resemble who God is and what we're supposed to look like. I think about it like this. In the days of kings and queens in medieval times, kings or queens would often put their seal on something, right? So if they wrote down something that needed to be sent somewhere, they'd fold it up and seal it with a wax seal. And maybe they'd put something in motion and they'd sign a document and they'd seal it at the bottom with a wax seal. And there was one seal for that king or queen that everybody knew this was them. If I got this document and it had that seal on it, I knew this represented that king or queen. I knew that this came directly from them. And I often think that that's the way that I want my life to be. I want people to understand that I carry that seal from God, that the things that I do and how I'm generous with my life, people are like, I know where that comes from. There's no question in my mind, because that seal only belongs to one person. That type of generosity is only honoring to one person, and that person is God. If you have kids, you'd probably think of it like this. This is the way that I think about it. Well, my dad is like one of my heroes, right? We grew up in a great Christian family. He was the best man in my wedding. He's one of the best examples to me of what it's like to be a godly husband and a godly father. So I look up to him a lot. And when people tell me that something I do reminds them of my dad, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm going for. Okay. So now I have kids. I have a young son and a young daughter. And when somebody says the same to them or comes up to me and says, hey, your son did this, and it really reminded me of you, hopefully in a good way. But here's the deal. I am so honored by that, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's what I hope for. I hope that you can see a little bit of me in my kids. And isn't that got to be what God is like? He's like, man, I love it when I get to see some resemblance of who I am in my kids, in us. And when we're generous, that's exactly what we're doing. We're reflecting the image of God in our life. And so as we go into this year-end season, I hope in all areas of your life, this looks like you are honoring God. Yes, this next weekend, we're going to take an offering together. And I hope you've been praying about it. I hope you've been believing for what it is that God wants to do in and through your life. But I hope it doesn't just stop at the giving portion. I hope that translates into all areas of God. How do I honor you when I'm generous with my kids? God, how do I honor you when I'm generous in my workplace? God, how do I honor you when I'm generous in my marriage? You can translate that into all areas. And I would hope that people have the opportunity to say, I know where that comes from. That's only one seal that I've known. That's the seal of God on your life. And when you're being generous like that, man, you are honoring God with everything that you are. So this weekend, here's what we're praying for. Here's what we're believing for. That you would ask God to speak to you, to help you understand what it looks like this coming weekend to be generous. To be generous in a way that honors God in so many areas of your life. I hope you're praying about it. And not just that, we're believing God each and every year for a word. What word are you believing God? Maybe with your family, maybe you have your own word, but you're saying, God, this is what I'm believing for moving into the next year. Maybe it's the word generous. Maybe it's the word honor. But God, I'm believing you for this word in my life moving into this next weekend. So very practically, here's what we would love for you to do. First and foremost, show up this weekend. Do not miss church. You have so many opportunities to be a part. Whether you attend one of our physical locations, make sure you're there. What an amazing weekend to get to come together as the church and know that what we're sowing into this ministry, first and foremost, is going to honor God on so many levels, but so that, like we read back at the very beginning, that people will be able to give thanksgiving to God because of how you have honored God this weekend. If you would like some more information about how to give and how to be a part of the year-end offering, all of that information is available for you online at elevationchurch.org. There's a banner right at the top of the page. You can't miss it. Click that banner and you'll be able to give right there and find out some more information. But what makes me the most excited is what it is that you have isn't just meant for you. It's meant for you to be able to come alongside other believers in Christ, join together, and give to God in a way that says, you know what, God, I want you to be able to work in and through me so that more people around this world can hear about the love of Jesus. We're never more like God than when we're giving, and we have that opportunity this weekend. You don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for being a part of the family here. Thank you so much for continually giving and going above and beyond. We cannot wait to see what God does in and through this ministry as you continue to be generous. We're all honoring God through it, and I promise you, the return is always up and to the right.